All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we are finally getting in to our training camp preview, going position by position, of course, starting with the quarterback position. And we'll be asking some big questions about both the season and summer training camp battles, whether or not the Falcons know who their starter in week one is going to be, and if that guy is the long-term answer at the position.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, as well as the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. In today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online is where the game starts. So, guys, I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen, just like all the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast shows, like Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, as well as A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanisha Batiste, all part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. You can find Locked On Falcons free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, and you'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So we are kicking off our training camp series now that OTAs and mini camps are done, and we have this, 5-6 week lull between now and when training camp actually kicks off. And so this is the time where we go position by position, breaking down each position group and talk about some of the key battles or whatever the case may be. I'm throwing a different wrinkle this year rather than just going through the roster like you guys. You can get that anywhere. But instead, we're going to be raising some of the big questions of the season for each position group, as well as the big questions for the summer. So, big questions that we hope to have answered 6 months from now, and big questions that we hope to have answered roughly 3 months from now. Right. And so let's start with the big question of the season. Right. And that is whether or not the Falcons have their guy at the quarterback, that franchise quarterback, because we know that that is an important element of success in this league. We know if you don't have a good quarterback, you're not going to have sustainable success, and you're certainly not going to be achieving at the highest levels, right? We know the Falcons are years away from competing for Super Bowls, but obviously you want to start laying that groundwork now, sooner versus later. Because if you don't, then you'll may never get the opportunity to start laying that groundwork, and it starts with the quarterback position, right? And we know that teams with middling quarterbacks struggle to achieve at that highest level of competition. We've had some mid-tier quarterbacks like Jimmy Garoppolo and the combination of Nick Foles and Carson Wentz in recent years make it to the Super Bowl. One of those teams actually won the Super Bowl, but I don't think in both of those cases it's a coincidence that both of those guys played on teams that had arguably in their respective seasons the league's most formidable pass rush, because we know that pass rush can limit opposing quarterbacks. And basically, when you have Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Nick Bosa and all those guys, right, bearing down on you, all of a sudden, even if you're an elite quarterback, you're going to start looking a little bit more ordinary. And all of a sudden now you're going to be playing closer to Jimmy Garoppolo's level or Nick Foles' level. And that makes you infinitely more beatable. We've seen Matt Stafford win a Super Bowl, obviously not necessarily an elite quarterback, a good quarterback, but not an elite quarterback. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Matt Stafford was finally able to achieve that, playing with what has been one of the top defenses in the league the last couple of years, top five or so. And also arguably one of the three best offensive minds in football, in Sean McVay, calling plays for him alongside guys like Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan. And you asked the question with the Falcons when it comes to whether or not, if they don't have one of those elite quarterbacks, a Patrick Mahomes, a Tom Brady, a Josh Allen, et cetera, those type of quarterbacks, they're going to have to build up something comparable to what the Rams and the Eagles and the 49ers have built. And, how many years How long is it going to take for the Falcons to build up that type of defense, that type of pass rush? Obviously, we're hoping, if we can land someone like Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, that will be a lot closer to that sooner versus later. But that's a big question. How long is it going to take for the Falcons to get that defense up to that level to compete at the highest levels? And then you have a legit question on whether or not Arthur Smith is a play caller on that level. All right. And so far, based off of the results we've seen in recent years, I don't think he's on that Sean McVay level and that Kyle Shanahan level, et cetera. But we'll see. That's one of the other questions that we're hoping to answer this upcoming season. So it's very important, all that to say, why the Falcons have to figure out this quarterback situation sooner versus later, right? Because potentially next year they'll have an opportunity to pull the trigger on a quarterback that is on that level, that does have that elite passing potential, and they need to have an idea on whether or not they should pass on that guy or pull the trigger on that guy. I'm operating under the assumption now, guys, that we'll have a top 10 pick, different from the previous assumptions where I was assuming that we'll have a top 5 pick. But never let anybody tell you that we're not optimistic on this podcast. We're going from 4 to 6, right? 3 to 8, right, in the draft order. So optimism. It's a new era of Locked On Falcons. But we sit here and we wonder, will they pass on a quarterback again like they did 2 years ago? And the only justification they'll have to doing so again is if they feel like someone like Desmond Ridder is a legit option. And so that's really what they need to find out. And you're not going to be able to find out if Desmond Ridder is a legit option by him simply sitting the bench. Now, I know a lot of people out there, or at least some people out there, they're in my comments most days, believe that Marcus Mariota has a chance to be that caliber of a starter and the type of guy that can lead you to the postseason. It can be that Jimmy Garoppolo, can be that Nick Foles type of player, and it's certainly possible. But the problem the Falcons and Mariota face is that they're on different timelines. In a world where the Falcons already had that strong supporting cast, maybe they could give it a run with Mariota, but they don't have that supporting cast, and they were probably years away from building up that supporting cast, right? And so essentially Marcus Mariota is a bridge or placeholder type of quarterback until they build up that supporting cast. And really he's just a bridge or placeholder quarterback until Desmond Ridder can sort of take over that role as that placeholder type of quarterback. And ultimately Desmond Ridder may also still be a placeholder slash bridge quarterback as well. Right. And he basically the value of Desmond Ridder is he gives you a super cheap option, and hopefully you can get competent quarterback play as you build up the rest of the roster. Right. You're only going to be paying him about, $1.5 million a year, which pales in comparison to what you would have to pay Mariota, which pales in comparison, obviously, to what we were paying Matt Ryan. And so all that extra cap space now can be invested in building up the rest of the roster, building up that pass rush, building up that offensive line, etc. All those various things. So that's the reality, I think, of the situation moving forward, that, this continues to be a evaluation year for the Falcons and evaluating Desmond Ridder more so than evaluating Marcus Mariota. But, we won't necessarily know the answer to the question on if we have our franchise quarterback until 6 months from now. And in the meantime, we have more pressing questions like who's going to be the starter come week 1. Right. And that's going to be the question that we'll ask and hopefully answer as we continue today's training camp preview here on Locked On Falcons, guys. But before we get there, I do want to remind you about the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, where you can find a daily show, multiple daily shows devoted to all things local sports as well as national sports. Locked On Sports Atlanta, A to Z with Mark Zeno, Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, at ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanisha Batiste. All can be found on the same podcast feed on your preferred podcast platform. And if you subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube, you'll also get access to the Atlanta Braves postcast, where Locked On Braves is breaking down every win, every loss for the Atlanta Braves this season. So go check that out. And guys, I also want to tell you about Blue Nile, our proud sponsors who are helping you find the tools, whether you're looking to pop the question or you're just looking for a classic timeless piece of jewelry for that special someone. They have the online tools to help you choose the shape, size, clarity, and style to handcraft that perfect one-of-a-kind engagement ring for your special someone. Or maybe you're looking for something a little less permanent, but you have a hard time choosing a bracelet, a ring, a necklace, whatever the case may be. Blue Nile's jewelry experts are on hand 24/7 via phone, via chat, to help you find that memorable gift that fits everyone's budget. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. So just use the code Locked On. That's code Locked On, LOCKEDON. And every order is shipped free, is insured, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress free and find your forever peace by going to BlueNile.com today. So, guys, I also want to remind you that the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is ongoing. So go check that out on your preferred podcast feed. Just search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft, and you'll get the Locked On experts, the Odyssey insiders breakdown of all the picks and whatnot, and who the Hawks should be taking, who the Cavs, who the Warriors, whoever. Right? You can find it all in the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. So go check that out on your preferred podcast app. So, guys, we're asking the big question of the season. Now we're asking the big question of the summer. And that is going to be who is going to be the starter. And, we don't quite know the answer to that, but we have a strong opinion on that. We've talked about how Marcus Mariota is the front runner to win that job. I've previously mentioned he's got a 70% chance of winning the starting job. And that's probably me lowballing it at this point in time because the buzz on Desmond Ridder has not necessarily grown over the course of OTAs and mini camps, right? Arthur Smith is saying that he's operating at a high level from the neck up. He's saying all the right things, but when it comes to the people actually observing on the practice field, when they've had these open practices, no one's really talking about Desmond Ridder closing the gap on Marcus Mariota as a starter. Most people, as we were closing out mini camps, were like, okay, Mariota's definitely the starter this season. If this was going to be a competition, Desmond Ridder hasn't done enough. Now, maybe he picks things up in the training camp. Certainly, there's potential of injuries impacting these things. They often do. You go back to 2008 with the running back position where Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman got hurt in that training camp, and ultimately Tevin Coleman won the starting job for week 1 because Tevin Coleman recovered from his injury first than Devontae Freeman did. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, we know Marcus Mariota has an injury history, so that will certainly be a factor. But for the time being, we're just going to assume that Marcus Mariota is going to be the starter. So if you were expecting, a big deep dive into Desmond Ridder and his chances on today's episode, we're not going to get that. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks talking about Desmond Ridder and what he can bring to the table. But let's talk a little bit more about what Marcus Mariota is going to bring to the table. We haven't spent that much time talking about that. And to me, the big question surrounding Mariota as a starter is going to be how he handles pressure, right? This would be the number one question for really anybody at this point in time. But for Mariota, it's particularly noteworthy because previously in the past, when you look at his body of work, he's not a guy that really has dealt with the level of pressure that, certainly Matt Ryan has dealt with in most recent years behind this offensive line, right? That you go back to, his peak years in Tennessee in 2016 and 2017, the Titans were top 5 in the league back then in terms of giving up the least amount of pressure. And when we look at Mariota's numbers, looking at how he's dealt with pressure, particularly PFF's metric of pressure to sacks, which is looking at how many times a quarterback is pressured and how many often those result in sacks. Mariota, historically speaking, has been sacked a lot more when he's been pressured, especially compared to Matt Ryan. It's like 40 to 50% more in that regard. So like if you look at Mariota's career averages when it comes to that pressure to sack metric, and you look at how often Matt Ryan was pressured last year, which was roughly about 250 dropbacks last year. If Matt Ryan was sacked about 40 times last year. But if Mariota, based off his career averages, was pressured that many times, he would be sacked nearly 60 times, about 58 times. And so one wonders behind this offensive line, will Mariota have the ability to thrive if he continues to play that style of football, which is a tendency to hold on to the ball. He wants to push the ball down the field. Mariota is much more of a gunslinging type of quarterback than a timing-based, a precision pace, get the ball out quickly, that type of quarterback that we've seen Matt Ryan be over the years. Now, I think Desmond Ridder also has the potential to be more of that style of quarterback than Desmond Ridder. Than Marcus Mariota is. And we'll see, if Mariota has evolved and adapted and changed and is willing to play more of that style of football today than he was in years past. But if he continues to be more of that hold on to the ball a lot longer, that's going to lead to adding more pressure to the position, which is one of the things that Mariota did frequently in Tennessee. That's another thing that PFF measures, which is how much of the pressure is responsible for the blocking and how much of it is responsible to the quarterback holding onto the ball. And Mariota was consistently throughout his career in Tennessee at the higher end of those pressure metrics in terms of quarterback pressure allowed. And so this has the potential to have, significant ramifications on this upcoming season based off of, how often Mariota is, playing, how long he's playing, how long that leash is going to be. And obviously a big factor this summer is going to be how the better Desmond Ridder is, if we're assuming that he's not going to be the starter, the shorter that leash is going to be on Mariota. And one of the elements I'm interested to see, and the dynamics I'm interested to see if it evolves this year, is do we get sort of Mariota as a starter, this more of a high ceiling, lower floor type of offense, this high variance offense where when Mariota is holding onto the ball and wanting to push the ball down the field to some of these young playmakers, do we see this offense, a lot more explosive with him at the helm and has a much higher potential to be impactful, but also because of the tendency to take more pressure and take more sacks and whatnot, do we see a lower floor for this offense? And then maybe when Desmond Ridder comes in, and again, it's certainly debatable whether or not he's going to have this level of development by that point, November, December, or whenever the case may be, do we see a little bit maybe of a higher floor because he's going to be a little bit more of that game manager type, but being less willing to push the ball down the field. And so the ceiling is lower. And, how does that dynamic play out for this offense and what Arthur Smith is wanting for this offense? So that'll be interesting to pay attention to. We'll see if that dynamic develops or whatever the case may be. But, I think the benefit of having Mariota as a starter, whether we're talking about the high floor, low ceiling type of stuff, you do wonder, if that's going to help this team, do a better job evaluating some of their young wide receivers, right? Do they have playmakers at that position? We hope we do, in Drake London and Brian Edwards and Kyle Pitts and all these guys. And, because of Mariota's style of play, which is going to want to push the ball down the field. And I think that's one area where you can legitimately say Mariota has the potential to be better than Matt Ryan, is that desire to push the ball down the field rather than living the play another down, which is more Matt Ryan style. So we might see more playmaking ability, but that's only going to be if those wide receivers are capable of making those plays. So Mariota is going to be important, I think, in evaluating these young receivers to see what their type of potential when it comes to the playmaking ability is. And longtime listeners of this podcast know I'm a big fan of explosive plays. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of those with Marcus Mariota at the helm. So that will sort of end the conversation in terms of the battle between the starters, but there's another quarterback in camp, and that's none other than Feleipe Franks. And there's an interesting question to see what his future is like as we continue today's Locked On Falcons training camp preview of this Falcons quarterback position heading into 2022. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug the Locked On NFL podcast, where you can find a daily show devoted to all 32 NFL teams, not just the Atlanta Falcons. So go check out Locked On NFL on your preferred podcast platform, including on YouTube. And guys, there's also no better time after you checked out Locked On Falcons, or Locked On NFL, I'm sorry, to go on over to Bet Online, the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. Use that information that you get from Locked On NFL to put some money down on some future NFL prop bets, whether they're Falcons related. You want to bet on Arthur Smith winning Coach of the Year, or Marcus Mariota winning Comeback Player of the Year, or you want to vote, for Aaron Donald Defensive Player of the Year. You can find the odds for that. You can find the odds for a multitude of things at Bet Online, whether you're looking for golf, Wimbledon, Stanley Cup Finals, you want to put NBA props in the future, draft picks, right? We got the draft coming up this week. Major League Baseball, of course, is ongoing. Boxing, esports, your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline.net has it all. So take advantage by heading over to the website today. BetOnline, where the game starts. So when we do these training camp previews, we talk about the big question of the season, the big question of the summer, and then we get into some of these key roster battles, some of the things to watch out for. And obviously at the quarterback position, the key roster battle is the battle for the starter. But as I just answered, we kind of know that. And really what's left is sort of that third quarterback situation. And right now there's not really much of a competition for Feleipe Franks, right? We know that Mariota and Ridder are settled the top depth chart. We're just questioning sort of if they flip-flop in the order from 1 to 2. But Franks is sort of solidified as at QB3, but he may not necessarily be spending all that time at quarterback this summer. We may be seeing a lot more of him at tight end, which is something that the Falcons experimented with and started tinkering with last September, given his athleticism, given his size. And I'm for it, right? It makes total sense to me, given that Franks' future at quarterback is very limited due to the presence of a young passer like Desmond Ridder. We know he's probably not going to be, or we think, let's say, we think we know that Felipe Franks is probably never going to be a high level QB2. He's probably never going to be the super efficient, type of guy that can, run this offense and manage the game. Like typically what most teams are looking for in their QB2s, at least their long-term ones. He's more of an athlete. We saw his limitations as a passer last summer and, the few opportunities he got to throw the football during the season. We've seen other teams successfully convert, college quarterbacks into NFL tight ends. Logan Thomas, Tyree Jackson, Marquise Gray are some examples over the last decade, to varying degrees of success. And so, because of that, I think it makes sense to me. I know he's going to be a polarizing player. A lot of people are going to be like, why is Arthur Smith enamored with Feleipe Franks, which totally makes sense. But from my perspective, given this team's emphasis on two tight end offenses, if they can convert Felipe Franks into a rosterable, again, not suggesting that he's going to be a starter, but a rosterable tight end that can give you some depth and value off the bench. I think that has value. Now, is that going to happen suddenly this summer? Probably not. But it is one of those things where, we could see that develop. And if we can keep him on the practice squad, it makes total sense from that perspective. Although knowing Arthur Smith, as we think we know, he may decide to keep Felipe Franks on the roster, and that will have obviously impacts, other position battles elsewhere on the team if we're saving, we're keeping three quarterbacks on the roster instead of two. But one of the interesting things I will be curious to see if it develops further as we get further along in training camp by the time we get to August and whatnot, if the Falcons start bringing in other quarterbacks, right? We've seen them kind of tinker with some tryout guys throughout, May and June at that position. And, I know Kurt Benkert was recently cut by the Packers, and I know a lot of Falcons fans are clamoring for him to come back, but I don't see the Falcons making any major moves anytime soon at that quarterback position, just because if they bring in another arm, that's going to take reps away from Desmond Ridder, and you don't want to take reps away from Desmond Ridder at this point in time. That's the beauty of Feleipe Franks, is he's not stealing reps from Desmond Ridder, because those reps he's moving the tight end. And so, but I do think the Falcons at some point may bring in another quarterback just so that they can have another sort of in-season practice squad option if in the event of an injury, so that they can just kick the tires. I wouldn't be totally shocked if that player wound up being AJ McCarron again, now that he may be a year recovered from whatever the injury that he had a year ago. So that will be something to keep an eye on as we get closer to the season. But other than that, like, there isn't a whole lot of, up for grabs at the quarterback position, unlike other positions. Again, technically, we do have a camp competition between Ridder and Mariota, but it seems like all signs are pointing to Mariota winning that job. And then the question is just going to be, how good is Desmond Ridder this summer? So that is that leash for Marcus Mariota. Could, the better Ridder is, that leash could be as short as like 4 games, right? And if the Falcons get off to a slow start, which they probably will this season, then you could see them turning to Desmond Ridder in October. If not, then it's much more likely that we'll see Desmond Ridder get the field on November, sometime around Thanksgiving, certainly by the time we get to December at some point in time. So a lot of that just depends on how good Ridder is this summer, how good Mariota is this summer, and we'll see if Felipe Franks shows some real promise as a tight end. He has the tools to be at least a decent option. I thought, the 2 snaps he played tight end last year added some value, better blocker than you would expect out of a former quarterback for that 1 rep. So we'll see if that translates over 40 reps this summer. So hopefully we'll see that later this summer. So guys, that's going to do it for us here on the training camp previews. We're at that dead time of the year. We're going to be doing more of these in the coming weeks. Hopefully we'll get the offense done before July hits, and then we'll have some fun stuff for you. Hopefully July 4th weekend, longtime listeners, you'll hear a familiar voice. And for those of you checking us out on YouTube, you'll see a somewhat familiar face, although I'm not sure how many YouTube appearances this guy has made over the years. But a hint is, he's good looking for a living. If you got, where I'm saying. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, that just sounds weird to you, but if you know, so we'll have some great content coming in July, probably around 4th of July for that. And then we'll probably get to the defense after that in the weeks leading up to training camp, and we'll similarly be asking, what's the big question for the season? What's the big question of the summer? If those questions are different or the same or whatever the case may be. And we'll go through each position group as we do every summer. We got some other great guests coming for you during this dead time of the summer as well. So make sure you stay tuned to Locked On Falcons. We got a lot of great content. We're probably going to be going 5 days a week, guys, between now and the season. So you will be able to get your Falcons fix. And for those of you, I will just say, because I'm going to probably give you 5 days a week all summer long, just be nice to me in the comments, guys. Like, I'm providing you guys a great service, and just roll with it. And if you disagree with, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I'm done rambling now, guys. I appreciate you tuning in for another episode. We will have the running back position. I don't know if that's going to be tomorrow or there's something else we're going to talk about. We might talk a little bit more about the running game as well before we get into the running back position, or maybe we'll go a little bit deeper on the Marcus Mariota stuff, because I'm sure that will be very enlightening conversation and debate and healthy, and people will respect each other's opinions in the comments on today's episode. As the 5 of you Marcus Mariota fans that comment on most of my videos that deal with Marcus Mariota will certainly, agree with everything I said about Marcus Mariota on today's episode. So I look forward to engaging with that. And if you guys want to engage with me further in future episodes, you can do so via comments here on YouTube, or you can hit me up via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Or of course, you can find me on your preferred social media platform like Facebook or Twitter at Locked On Falcons. So guys, that will do it for us here. I appreciate you for tuning in another episode. Check out Locked On NFL. Check out the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. Check out Blue Nile. Check out Bet Online and more. So, guys, that is it. I hope you enjoyed your Father's Day. For those of you checking us out on Sunday, I hope you had a happy Juneteenth. What do we say for Juneteenth? I don't know, but anyway, I have some thoughts on it, but like it's too late now. It's too late, this corporate takeover of Juneteenth and whatnot. Just like, it doesn't sit well with me. But we'll let that go. We'll save that for another episode. Locked on, American holidays or whatever the case may be. So I'm done. I'm done rambling now at the end of the show. Appreciate it, guys. Till then.